That's a different message.
Yet another warning.
Yeah. They don't want to scare us.
Live from the Plutopia verse, this is the Plutopia News Network. Our guest tonight is Jake Dunagan. I'm Scoop Sweeney, and our resident smart guy over there is John Lebkowski.
Where?
Be smart, John.
I don't feel that smart. Yeah, well, we're here to talk about the future of maybe governance. Uh, if we do have a future. I'm going to start before we talk to Jake with a quote that I found on the Institute for the Future site, looking through their Governance Futures Lab section, which is where Jake has done a lot of work. And it's a quote from Larry Lessig. And he says, "The corruption of today is in plain sight. The mechanism of its reach is displayed to everyone. It is the simple and pervasive economy of influence that buys access and more through campaign cash. And then, without explicit recognition, the actions of our government are guided by the understanding of how those acts will affect the opportunity to raise money." So it's kind of all about money, right?
When I wonder, I don't know if there was a date on that. I wonder, I'm guessing probably 15
I,
years, 20 years.
I, I don't know. Let's see. I can find out for you. It's not, I don't think it's that
It doesn't
old, is
really
it?
matter because it's evergreen, but I'm just saying that
Oh, it's
that
2010. Yeah,
yeah,
right on 14 years.
that sentiment is not new, and the diagnosis of some of the fundamental issues is not new, for better or worse.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we can think about is the difference between politics and governance, because right now it's kind of all politics. The the politicians, especially now, they don't necessarily intend to govern when they're elected to office, and that's kind of a problem. I mean, they're not even thinking about public service or governance. They're just thinking about probably about enrichment, possibly just about celebrity. I don't know. And I was kind of wondering, so you did this Governance Futures Lab project. Is it still, are you still doing anything with it right now?
Oh yeah, yeah. We are what you might say is opportunistic about things. We catch things as they come, and we're always looking for opportunities to intervene. And right now, we're doing a lot of work, as we've been doing for the last 6 years, with the U.S. Conference of Mayors. So city leaders and that group has been a key part of our point of intervention, and honestly, my sanity. Working with city leaders has been tolerable, and it gives me faith that there are people that actually care. Both parties, that are a goodwill that actually trying to do the right thing. Our national politics is a cesspool, as we know, but there are pockets of hope. Let's put it that way. We'll get into some
That's
dark things.
good.
Maybe I'm counter programming myself to say some positive things at the start.
Yeah, well, what I'm
Well,
hearing on the governance scene is that even the Republican conservative groups have decided that the national politics are just a mess, and they're concentrating on local elections. Local
Mhm.
and state elections are where the power is.
I think we're finding how powerful those spots are. I mean, we saw it in 2020 with election officials and kind of what we might have called functionaries before, holding together the fabric of democracy by not giving in to some pressure. Amazingly, honestly, I mean, these should be lauded as heroes against the massive amount of pressure that was put on them. But things like school boards, you see the craziness with Moms for Liberty, and where are the points of intervention? I think we're finding it's like a shark looking for any vulnerabilities in the system, trying to find those little
well, I
entries.
think I think we got used to um, a fairly de-energized far right for a long time, and they were sort of like they couldn't really get traction. They were there, and they were, you know, they were complaining as they complain now, but they didn't really manage to cultivate much of an audience or a set of fellow travelers. So it was a much smaller group, I think. And I guess this all changed when Donald Trump was elected and energized that whole like tribe of people. And of course, there's a lot of diversity in that tribe and factions and so forth. He managed to get them moving kind of in a single direction. And there were already people who were pulling levers. I mean, he was a symptom, he wasn't a cause exactly. And there were people who were pulling levers to manipulate the system to push it to the right as far as they could. And here we are. It's unbalanced. People may argue that it was unbalanced on the left. I don't think so, but they may argue that it was at one time. Now I think we have a concern. We have a concern about fascism, really. And I used to really feel weird if I said the word fascism and if I was actually applying it to the real world. It sounded like an overstatement. It doesn't anymore.
No, I don't think so. I think it's a pretty fair account of a visible and powerful faction that has captured, the levers of power. Yeah, I think you're right. It was marginal. I don't know about numbers, but it was kind of marginal. I mean, you have Timothy McVeigh. You have these moments in time historically. I mean, a friend and colleague, Jared Yates Sexton, wrote a book called Midnight Kingdom, and he went back a couple thousand years, looking at some of the conspiracies and myths and things that came out of the Roman Empire, about Christians, and how these same stories keep getting recycled through time, through the Inquisition or through every one of these moments. There's a lot of very, very similar things about paranoia, about people that want to wrest power from the powerful. And so these spate of conspiracies and kind of paranoid moments recycle. So, I mean, in the long history, this is nothing new. I think what's kind of interesting is, yeah, you're right. The rebirth of legitimacy of that point of view with Trump. I think he was the wedge that entered the system again and made it somehow legitimate, and that opened the doors to a lot of that stuff that was kind of in this, delegitimized in the margins, and that has erupted, and I think we're dealing with it. But for me, in my point of view, it's a festering issue. It's a human issue, and that kind of gives you the long view of this. It's not something that's going to go away at the next election. I think we need to think about this as a human struggle. And when you have that kind of point of view, it gives you a little bit of space, and it gives you a little bit of maybe girding your energy for what we're facing, rather than thinking one more election, one more cycle. No, it's an ongoing struggle where people are pushing against those that want to consolidate and dominate people.
Yeah, in the past, everyone always looked to Congress for governance, for changes to that really would help the country. They would come from that area, but that's so locked down now by all the disputes that it seems that the justice system is where it's really happening. The courts are creating our changes, really, and there doesn't seem to be much that either House of Congress can do about these changes. Like, for instance, the Alabama ruling that frozen embryos are children. And I know I've talked to some financial folks, and they already saw what's going to be the big explosion from that. Is if you're a taxpayer in Alabama and you have 20 frozen embryos, can you go and on your taxes and claim them as dependents? Because in your local area, those are children. Mm-hmm. That's going to cause a big explosion, I think.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, these are little hand grenades into our system that we don't even know. I mean, the people that are ruling don't know the implications of them. It's funny you say the judiciary, because I came out of a program study with a guy named Jim Dater, who one of his lines of work was really thinking about which branch of government is future oriented, the most future oriented, and Congress is kind of always sort of retrograde, behind the times, trying to deal with things after they've happened. And the executive branch, has its own limitations as well. But for him and for a lot of people, the judiciary was where real futures work, real futures thinking happened. You're thinking about consequences of your decisions. That's part and parcel of your decision making process. And so that was the branch that stood out to him, as the most future oriented branch of at least our government as it stands. But it's funny, because now we're seeing these sort of retrograde, reactionary kind of decisions coming from the judiciary. And if you want to look at where the leverage is to shape the future, I think you're right. And I think the Mitch McConnell wing and a lot of the right wing knew that for a long time. I think they've known that in their bones for a generation. And this is not the result of 4 years of putting judges on the Supreme Court. This is really a generational scale thing of packing the court with people of ideological, bents that now have cycled through the whole system. And yeah, I grew up in Alabama, so this one is very personal to me. And living in a white nationalist, Christian nationalist state, basically, the kind of laboratory of that way of being, seeing that play out now on a national scale it's fairly disturbing, I have to say, from my point of view.
Well, and they're not really in sync with where people are in this country, kind of generally speaking. It's not like they represent a minority of thinking. In fact, there's, this great cultural pluralism in this country, and there's such a diversity of beliefs. But I think that more people want to have, for instance, religious freedom versus religious nationalism than don't. And that may work against them at some point, the fact that they're not in sync. The other thing is that I'd say that there's a pretty significant number of people who are working the political beat and trying to get into government now who are basically just grifters. The ad absurdum example is George Santos or Donald Trump. Donald Trump is really just a transactional. He just wants to find ways to get money from people. If he can do it honestly, he might do that. If it has to be dishonestly, he'll absolutely do that. But he's really just trying to get money and power. And right now, I guess he's also trying to avoid prison. If I get elected president, maybe they won't send me to prison. But I think that, my hope, I guess, and belief is that these are weaknesses. The focus purely on grift and the fact of being kind of out of step with where most people are could be a weakness and not representing any kind of strength, so that eventually this thing starts to implode. But meanwhile, we got a problem on our hands. Does that sound right?
That sounds right if you think that we have a democratic system where the majority is going to win the day. I'm sorry, now we're going to get into the cynical part of the hour.
No, that's okay.
It doesn't matter what most people want if you don't care about democracy, if you don't care about legitimately winning elections. If you care about seizing power, this is the focus of the right wing right now, and the sort of MAGA cult wing is they are solely focused on power consolidation, not about the nuances of healthcare or how do we strengthen international relations or supply chains. Doesn't effing matter when all you care about is consolidating power, and you're looking for the weaknesses, you're looking for the levers of power, and you don't even have to win an election, or you can seize power and stack the deck in any way you can. Democracy will be okay as long as it works to serve you, and when it doesn't, you're going to throw it out. Your God is white power and the money. So when you say most people don't want it, that is a salve a little bit, in a way, but it's not decisive. I mean, we, 6, 7, 8 years ago, we were talking about dreamers getting rights, and how far left was the immigration discussion at that point versus what it is now. And building a wall was stupid and ridiculous. Biden and the left wing says, take it, do what you want. Your craziest, policy that you want, we'll do it. And they still didn't do it, of course. But look how that conversation changed. Look how abortion changed. And now we're just trying to hold on to the scraps of maybe half the states can have some abortion rights. Maybe we can make an exception for rape in some of their states. So just know that the majority of people believing in something and backing something can change very quickly. And the positive spin is leadership. Where do you want to take people? And as much as it is anathema to my values, the MAGA wing has shaped the conversation, and they are dominating the conversation, and they are moving the window over. And so that is, again, in a neutral sense, leadership. And so what's the countervailing to that, rather than just trying to hold on to the last bits of maybe majority rule, maybe if you win election, it just feels very desperate on the left to try to hold on against this juggernaut of focus. It's not the majority, but it is a focused, mission-driven group of people that have no endpoint other than seizing absolute control over the system. And so what do you do? It's the greatest dilemma that we've faced, I think, in our lifetimes for sure, is what do you do when your opponent does not play by the rules, and you're trying to hold on to legitimacy, and the other side is not. I mean, I think that's our democracy death spiral at this point.
And working in strategic foresight, what are some of the ways you would approach that problem?
Yeah, I mean, how do you? Okay, well, there's like a wargaming side of this. You saw that with groups like the Transition Integrity Project doing tabletop gaming of what what Putin might do, or what how people might subvert elections. So these are fingers in the dike as far as I'm concerned. But you got to do that. These are the urgent things. So that's the kind of urgent moment for strategic foresight or futures thinking is hold up the system for what you want. But if you don't have a vision of why life is better with a democracy versus a Christian nationalist theocracy, it's not going to hold up with the unbending will of people that are going to support this kind of fascist authoritarian movement. And so I think we have to have a magnet. We have to have a way to say your life is going to be better with democracy. Your life is going to be worse. Even the people that are supporting it, your life is actually going to be worse with Mike Johnson calling the shots for this country. You want simple things like IVF. You want to have a baby. You want your daughter who was raped not to have her rapist baby. Like these are the kind of things that you're going to have to accept if you're living in a Christian nationalist, white nationalist place. So I think there's both an immediate hold on to the systems that we want to hold on to, that just keep things together so that it's not absolute civil war and chaos. But then also reiterate in a compelling way, why did we build this system? Why did democracy exist? Why is it better than alternatives? And state that case repeatedly. Show people what living in this future a better future might be like, and why democracy is part of that better future. That's a sort of missing part. And there's a lot of people in my world that are talking about that and trying to do things like that, but that's not part of our mainstream conversation. It's all retrenchment into hold on to the scraps of what we have. And that's not enough. It's part of it, but it's not enough.
Yeah, I just wonder if the current Republican Party can survive if it continues in this, pretty much civil war that's been going on within the party. If you look at just Texas, I grew up in a Republican household. My dad was in the oil and gas industry. He was very conservative in the old conservative pro-business Republican Party. And I have considerably different beliefs than he had, but I look back on what he felt needed to be happening in the country, and I don't think he would recognize the Republican Party, especially in Texas. If you go and look at the way they used to say, smaller government, let the people, the local governments, do the important work. Now, you don't want. Well, it depends on what that government is like. You have these places in North Texas in the Panhandle who are setting up laws that prohibit travel for abortion through their area, which is a pretty sketchy, approach to law, but they've passed these laws. Then you have the big metro areas, which are more progressive, a lot more liberal leaning, and then you've got a governor who says, well, the big guys here, the big metro areas can't be doing this stuff, but you can do it if you're out in the rural areas and you're a good Republican county. So I don't see how they can survive continuing with this infighting and this, split personality that they're exhibited.
I've talked a lot, and I'm conscious of viewers just hearing, rants constantly, but I of course have thoughts. I mean, I think the Republican Party that probably our fathers and relatives grew up believing in it doesn't exist. There's been a takeover of Donald Trump and certain senators by Vladimir Putin and that crowd, at least that ideology. Trump has then taken over the Republican Party. There is no outside to that. It is loyalty or death. And if you're Liz Cheney or if you're Mitt Romney, you're done. So there is no alternative. And you're right, it's a split, but it's over as far as I'm concerned. The MAGA world is the Republican Party. Can it survive itself? I mean, I know there's like here in Texas, maybe people that are national aren't seeing the contours of this, but John Cornyn and our Attorney General and folks are kind of infighting to a degree that people may not recognize. But this is a purge, and I think the MAGA right is winning every purge when there's a battle. And so that's it. There is no Republican Party. It's Trump Putinism. Now, can that survive? Again, this is it. This is the big play. It's all or nothing. And I really gravitate to people who get it, who understand that this is all the way, that there's no stopping. There's no internal brakes on this system from those who are they're committed. They're committed to power or oblivion. And I hate to be so absolute about it, but here we are, and I don't think it's wrong. I think that nobody's going to stop themselves in this kind of trajectory. There will be required to be a pushback that is going to be really uncomfortable to stop it. And there are people that want. They want the conflagration that ends it all, and that there's a lot of bloodthirsty people who want to see a kind of reckoning of one way or the other for this, and so I think we have to be sober about what we're facing and the direness of the situation, because if these court cases and the felonies didn't break the fever, then that's not I don't know if intra-system forces are going to be able to hold it together. I just see a very dire thing when Trump's against the wall. He's going to call for violence, and there are millions who are going to heed that call. So I think we need to be realistic about that scenario. I'm a futurist. So I don't do predictions. I don't say this is inevitable. There are maybe some alternatives, but if you ask me what the most plausible future is, I think when pushed to the wall, there's going to be a call for violence, and there's going to be a lot of people answering that call. And I'm not sure.
Well, there's a question of whether there's a question of whether they actually have the power and the force to be very effective, if they do get that call to violence. And I'm sure there's people who won't be able to bring themselves to become violent. So I tend to think that it won't be as forceful as maybe Trump in his mind thinks it will be. But I don't know. I mean, so we're in the end times now, and I realized the other day that the rapture already happened, but they only took two guys.
We're in the
I don't
transition.
know, man.
We're not in
Yeah,
the there will be an after. Whatever happens next, there will be an after. And we've been maybe at the edge of abyss and pulled back. I will look at alternatives that the rule of law and that maybe things will hold together as we know them. But I know that there are a healthy number of people that are ready and pining to do some nasty stuff.
well, I realize now, and I only recently came to this realization. I'm probably not a very good student of history, but I believe that in the lead up to World War II, there was a very strong fascist movement in the United States, and that they supported Hitler. And it was sort of like the thing now where you have the MAGA people and they're kind of lining up with Putin. You had people who were like Nazi sympathizers in the US and they were lining up with Hitler. And they didn't ultimately succeed, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
Though there is a kind of interesting, I think about what was it, The Man in the High Castle, Philip Dick's book, the alternate history where the Nazis and the Japanese had won the war, the Axis had won the war, and I remember when I read that, I started wondering whether maybe they really did win the war.
Well, there was a documentary series on one of the reality TV channels by Bob Baer, who's a retired CIA agent and analyst, and he had a group that was tracking the what they call the rat line from Germany to South America of Nazi officials, military equipment, and a lot of money apparently, and they had a significant presence of the basically the Fourth Reich is what they wanted to establish in South America, and they came pretty close. And one wonders, how much of that stuff did it manage to migrate up here, because they were very good at hiding who they really were.
Oh man, I mean, that's recent history. I mean, I grew up with Confederate flags flying, and the South will rise again. And so the neo-Confederate. So this is the interesting thing, I think, for me is these strands of history coming together in this amorphous, almost non-ideological mix of madness, where you've got kind of neo-Confederates, you've got neo-Nazis and kind of the skinhead groups, you've got Christian nationalists, almost like Salem witch trial folks, and you've got kind of basically a mafia rule mentality, which I think is where Trump comes from, which is just it's family and it's loyalty or death. It's a weird time where these different strands have come together and they're making common cause with each other, especially the mafia wing of the right wing, which I associate with Trump, and then the Christian nationalist wing coming together, Mike Johnson types, each finding, each thinking the other side is kind of useful idiots. Like we'll use Trump to get, abortion banned, and Trump will use the Christian nationalists to get elected and get power. And so, with all these other strands of neo-Confederates and fascists and monarchists and whoever they else are mixed in this crew. So I think that's what's really, to me, the novel thing and the really interesting thing is this amorphous group of people that just want power. And there's grifters and there's charlatans and there's mafia types and there's oligarchs and billionaires, and it's just so hard to have a coherent response to, because there is not a coherence. Like, okay, anti-fascist, I get it. Well, no, that's part of it, but it's also, sort of family oriented, La Cosa Nostra kind of mafia thing, where we're just going to kind of seize power and give spoils to our friends. And then there's like the Christian nationalist thing that thinks we're in a holy war. So it's a very strange mix, which I'm hesitant to say, but it might be unprecedented that you've got this sort of strange brew of folks who just are hell bent on power, and by any means, and the value set is we're right and we have to seize power because everything's on the line. And so when people are desperate like that, and they're true believers, the mafia side is not true believers, they're just power hungry, but the Christian nationalists may be true believers. And so that's a dangerous mix. And I think that's why we're having a hard time cognitively grasping it and also fighting it.
Yeah, but believers in what? It's hard to imagine that. I mean, I don't think of them as actually Christians. But in fact, there was a story circulating not long ago about, um, I don't know, there was a guy who had given us a talk, a preacher gave a talk about the Sermon on the Mount to his congregation. And members of the congregation came up to him afterward and said that they didn't like the talk because he made Christ appear weak. And he was just talking about, the Sermon on the Mount as it was, and they felt that that was too weak. So I don't think that they're really Christians in the sense that they follow Christ. They're following something, but I don't think it's any kind of like actual religious teaching or spiritual following. And maybe to your point, they're just following power.
That's the easy answer and maybe the right answer, but give me a break. I don't know what point of history this bifurcated, but people that actually call themselves Christian that follow the teachings of Christ, has been that's a fugitive combination, of people that truly believe that. It's we want the Punisher or Rambo. We don't want turn the other cheek. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
it's control and power and mercy and empathy and honor and not cheating. Those are weaknesses. Those are not strengths. If you're not, this is I told you I grew up in Alabama, so I got old NASCAR phrases in my head. But if you're not cheating, you're not trying. And so, like an honorable defeat is not a thing anymore. And that, when it made it to the NFL, I knew that was going to be a bellwether day, and it has. There really is no defeat. It's a conspiracy. The Chiefs won because Taylor Swift and Joe Biden engineered it that way. So even our sports, which is supposed to be the most, level set meritocracy, whoever's the best wins. No, there's machinations behind the scenes. So nothing is real. And that's a very dangerous situation. If people won't accept a fair loss, then you don't have a democracy, and you probably don't have a society.
Yeah, those are screwed up conspiracy theories. I have better conspiracy theories. For instance,
I
I think
know, aren't
that
they so
Trump
boring,
was
the ones we have now?
I think Putin was conspiring with Hamas. I think that Putin encouraged them to attack Israel. Uh, and every day that I think about it, I'm more convinced that it's correct. It's a conspiracy theory, but
I
I
mean,
think there
that's
may
the
be
thing.
something to it.
There are things that happen. I mean, the fact that the Catholic Church shuffled around pedophiles for decades is an open conspiracy. That's where the power is. Or you know, billionaires paying off politicians, and Clarence Thomas being paid off by billionaires for decisions at our highest court. These are open conspiracies that we all know about. But yeah, Hillary
Yeah.
Clinton is drinking adrenochrome. That's the one we latched on to. Uh, it kind of twists your mind. Let's say that.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the supposed hoax, Russian collusion that Trump colluded with Russia. It's really just obvious that he did. Um, and there's a hoax, but the hoax is that that was a hoax. And it's almost too much to handle, you know. I mean, it's hard to know what to believe. And the people that we have depended on to help us through the sense making process is like journalists, media journalists. And they're, some of them are doing pretty well, but others are not doing as well. And the media landscape is so fragmented, and there's so much disinformation pouring into it. Um, I, I mean, if we could fix that problem, if we could just fix that, we'd be, we'd have a, we would progress better than we're progressing right now, I think. However you define progress.
Mm. I mean, I think we are at an unusual spot with truth and trustworthiness and legitimacy at every one of our institutions. But again, I lean on deep history, and we didn't have social media when millions of people in the South thought that slaves were better off living with their masters than being free. You know what I mean? So I just keep going back to these things, that these are kind of pernicious worldviews and myths that infect humans, and social media can spread those. They can do it very fast, and it's massively effective. And I'm not saying there's not a transformative effect of the media. I mean, fascism rose with radio. There are technologies that are exploited by those who want to do ill will. So I'm not saying that it's not, but I'm saying it's not sufficient to tell the story of what's happening. And I think you're right. I think we need what we call at the Institute for the Future in some of our work, cognitive immunity. Like, we need to build up this kind of inoculation or antibodies to the bullshit. It's kind of media agnostic. I mean, that's something that we need to do all the time. We've got AI, we've got deep fakes. There's going to be another wave. I mean, we're at the tip of the iceberg. How is that going to be weaponized this cycle? I'm just, I wait for every moment that there's going to be some crazy use of that. And it's funny that fake news has, Trump usurped that term, but that was the mechanism for spreading lies to help him by the Russian troll farms. He's like, oh, it's fake news. So immediately when something, goes into the mix, then it's going to be usurped or, misused. But I think a broad spectrum cognitive immunity is our bulwark against this. And that, again, it goes beyond history and media. It's just something that we as humans have to keep cultivating.
Well,
It's hard work.
The rise of artificial intelligence and its ability to create new realities, or what appear to be realities that don't really exist except within these artificial intelligence engines. They've created things like deep fakes, and they faked legitimate famous people and have them saying things they would never say. That's become obvious especially on what used to be known as Twitter, on X. Then they've allowed a lot of this stuff to get circulation, and that's a really scary thing, to where you can have any famous person, you could bring back Gandhi and have him going, pro-war. I mean, that's how ridiculous it is. But it's scary. There are people who will believe it because it's on TV.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I just watched Abraham Lincoln's endorsement of Trump live on TV now. I mean, everything's fair game now. And I mentioned, deep history and these long connections to some of these ideas, but never with the powerful tools that we have now, and just the absolute degrading of truth and reality and legitimacy is unprecedented in that sense. So you don't think, I mean, 2016, 2015, 2016, if Trump's Access Hollywood tape came out now, he wouldn't say that was just total deep fake? I mean, of course he would, and I'm surprised that doesn't happen more often, like some sort of crazy quote or, recording is just claimed to be not truthful. So it's not even the things that are faked. It's that even the real things can now be undermined by just calling it. Just call it fake. I didn't really say that, and just roll with it. When you have no norms, when you don't care about truth, then we've now opened the door where nothing can be verified to the satisfaction of enough people.
So you talked about cognitive immunity, and that sort of protects you against the bullshit. And then the other question is how you actually recognize the stuff that's not bullshit. We had this concept of authoritative sources at one time, but right now that's iffy from various perspectives. I hear a lot of people knocking the New York Times, for instance, from the left and the right. The right says the New York Times is too far to the left. The left says it's too far to the right. Meanwhile, those people, I mean, I think they're still trying to report the news with some degree of objectivity and authority and accountability. But at the same time, people just aren't believing them. So part of it is how do we develop this cognitive immunity? And then part of it is how do we establish some kind of authority for truth?
Yeah,
I expect you to have the answer.
No, and I don't know if it's like putting the genie back in the bottle where we're going to go back to where these institutions have the authority that they used to have. It's something on the other side, as yet unnamed, is how do we find common reality or something that we can agree on to have a society where even the basic foundational building blocks of reality can have enough of a common cause or enough of a common understanding to build something together. That's the fear, is that we're not. I think we're in a floating situation right now where we don't have those, and people want to go back to sort of universalist enlightenment ideas. I understand that feeling. Let's go back to science, or let's go back to the objective truth, which was rightly critiqued for generations. Or are we all just it's all just might makes right, and whoever has the control of power dictates reality? I mean, a lot of Putin's Russia looks very similar to North Korea as a broad social hallucination, and a lot of the MAGA world looks like North Korea. There's nothing about facts or truth or information that will break that belief that the world is out to get Trump and we're part of it and that it's a conspiracy, rather than our whole court system is corrupt. You rather believe that all of our institutions are corrupt, rather than the person you believe in is actually guilty of a crime. And that is, I've said it many times, it's a dangerous situation, and I really don't know what's on the other side. And I just in my gut don't feel like going back to some sort of gatekeeping, we're the ones that arbitrate truth, is going to be decisive in this. But I don't have an answer what's on the other side of having a functional society that doesn't have that either. That's not corrupted by this, the sort of the abuse of power that some will take. In that fluidity, they will abuse the system in order to gain more power.
After the January 6th nightmare, they were able to prosecute, the government was able to prosecute a lot of members of the big, alt-right groups, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers. Those guys sent a lot of people to prison. A lot of independent, treasonous people were sentenced to various prison or jail terms. And I thought maybe that was, going to be the end of all of those folks, but there are new ones popping up. And if you want to get scared, go to rodofIronministries.com. And that is
killing me.
truly, I mean, these are folks who think they need to be carrying their guns all the time and beating up on the libs, and it's just and they are defending the January 6th victims, not the ones you would think. The poor people that were put in jail for being MAGA.
The hostages.
It is a frightening movement, and there's plenty more just like it. We have them in Texas all over the place.
400 million guns is the last thing I saw in this country. And people that think they have a righteous truth that will justify their violence. It's a very dangerous situation. And the system, which I thought, like you, there was a moment where I thought maybe the kind of mainstream legitimacy of the court system and prosecuting the folks that tried to overthrow our government would hold, but I don't know. And maybe, there is a number of a percentage where it kind of breaks one way or the other, and there's also timing. I'm a futurist, but I also know that history is not some sort of inevitable march. There may be a moment where this, the McVeigh types break too soon and the backlash goes hard against them. I'm honestly surprised there hasn't been more political violence yet that we've seen, out and out political violence. So it's about timing, it's about the narrative that gets crafted after that. People hated John Brown for trying to relieve a slave revolt, but it also galvanized people against it. What is the story that's going to be told, and who are the ones pulling the levers of that storytelling? And so, to me, it's so, if I didn't have a stake in this game, like being human with children and actually caring about people's lives, really interesting situation where things could break one way or the other, depending on the timing and who does the violence when. For a split second, I thought the Kansas City thing was like a right wing, anti-Biden, anti-Chiefs, anti-Taylor Swift kind of thing. So there's going to be a moment like that where it may be a high profile thing. It may be like the whole Arab Spring, a fruit vendor in Tunisia that sparks something extremely large. And so, almost look for those small moments that are going to explode. And what happens? Where do people fall? Are we so far? Have you gone so far that no matter what happens, you're fighting the civil war for your side? Or is there like, okay, yeah, you're 10 to 15% of our population. You're the crazy cultist, but you're not the majority. And it's kind of hard to say how people will align. I know there's enough now ready to kill and die for especially the sort of Trump MAGA side. What does that look like? Is it enough to start an actual war, or is it a little flare up that flames out their movement and delegitimizes it finally? It's such a fragile, honestly, I thought about this on January 6th. It's such a fragile balance where it could go either way, and people will start to side. They'll look for the kind of political wins and where things are going, and they'll side with the side that they think is going to win.
Well, I read, and we interviewed him recently, Jeff Jarvis' latest book, actually not his latest book, but a recent book that he wrote. It was called the Gutenberg Parenthesis. And what he's talking about there, and that wasn't an original concept with him, but it's something he picked up on, and he wrote a whole history of print, Gutenberg forward. But when he refers to the parenthesis, and I can't remember the name of the person who originally came up with this idea of the parenthesis. But the parenthesis is that before print, you have knowledge and information sort of socialized. It's just transmitted socially. It's by word of mouth, really. They don't really have a much better way to do it. And then print appears, and print brings us a whole era that leads up through the era of mass media. And that brings like modern sense of authority for information, the sense of the political structures that we have, the educational structures we have. So much it depends on this evolution of print as a kind of top-down way to organize and distribute knowledge. And then we get the internet. And that's when the parenthesis closes. And we have a different kind of era where knowledge, again, is and information is socialized, distributed socially through social media, as we were discussing. And it's kind of a radical change, this many-to-many communication system, and this drift away from a top-down communication where authority is kind of following established channels. And what I came to believe when I read this and thought about it was, Jeff makes the point that it took hundreds of years for print to have the effect that it had, and the internet's just been with us for 30 years, since it started mainstreaming. So we're kind of still early in the evolution of the internet. And it could be that we're experiencing a kind of culture shock, a transitional period where everything just gets totally screwed up just because we don't really know how to deal with it. We haven't figured out how to organize ourselves in a way that is productive versus counterproductive. And that maybe the future is in trying to understand how to adapt to the information reality that we're in, and the way that information flows in a way that we don't just get completely whacked out, which is kind of the way it feels right now.
I mean, lots of threads to pull on that phrase, John. I mean, you were born in semi-rural Texas, West Texas.
Yeah.
Maybe at the end of radio and the dawn of TV. I mean, I like to humanize this in a way. Like, what have you seen in your lifetime, the media environments that you yourself as a human being have experienced in your lifetime?
Well, yeah. I mean, so when I was a kid, we had a daily newspaper, and people would kind of read it. They would spend 10 or 15 minutes on the news, something like that. On television, originally the television news from the networks was a 15-minute program at the end of the day, like Huntley Brinkley or Walter Cronkite, and those expanded to a half hour later. But starting, it was just 15 minutes of news. People were not getting inundated with news, and certainly were not getting inundated with politics and propaganda. They were getting a very small amount of media input. And I think, let's see, we had 3 television stations that we could actually watch, 3 networks, and they were all kind of telling the same story. There was not a lot of diversity of narrative. And if you were a crazy kid like me, you would start sucking up information from wherever you could find it. So I was inundated. I got tons of stuff, but most people didn't. Most people didn't really know or care that much about what was going on. They didn't follow politics that closely. I mean, part of, I think, of the sickness of the moment is that we're so completely immersed in information and in politics. I mean, I know that there are people who watch political channels. Suppose cable news is really just political like propaganda. And they're watching that for 3, 4 hours a day. That's a real different way of life than we had when I was growing up.
Constant agitation. I mean, I just think,
Yeah, it's driving us crazy.
we have, we have three Gutenberg revolutions before we finish breakfast. Feels like sometimes, you know what I mean? Like, okay, well, now it's TikTok, or now it's deepfakes, now it's AI generated, you know, whatever it is. And yeah, I don't think we have the capacity to deal with these tsunamis every moment, especially when you're agitated, when you're precarious, when you don't have enough money, when you think something's going to be taken away from you, and when you have people telling you that it's somebody else's fault, that your feeling of insecurity and precarity can be put on. I mean, this is the old method, with the old wine in a new vessel, in a new bottle. Blame the other rather than real forces that are causing your stress. Do it on TikTok now. Do it on Reddit. Do it on with the deepfake, and verify your anger and make you feel the way you want to feel, which is either righteous anger, or I'm a victim, or I know who to blame and I'm going to get them. And so those machines that can push our buttons went from the thing that was thrown on your doorstep in the morning, or maybe 15 minutes at night, to every single minute of the day. And there's no escape, and you are agitated and ready to go from morning to night. And I think it's grinding us up, and we don't have the biological responses. We don't have the cultural resistance to this. We don't have the psychological resistance to this. It's too much for us, and it's not fair, and it's unfortunate, because good people are being led down dark paths because of that.
Yeah, I grew up in the same small town as John, and my career started in radio news in that small town, and it was definitely small market AM radio, and I was the news delivering guy, and I was told, you will not talk about these certain subjects. And that's the way that AM radio news worked for a long time, until FM came along, and I was liberated from AM and went to public radio. And the difference actually scrambled my brain a little bit. I couldn't believe that people were actually allowed to express different views on the radio. That just wasn't happening in Texas. Mm-hmm. And experienced the same thing when the internet came along. You were able to do things that people weren't allowed to do before. But sometimes it gets out of control, and then you have people doing things that really shouldn't be done, either in public or private, but you're getting it right in your face on the internet. Like this place. You're getting this in your face on the internet right now. We've got a couple of minutes left, but what's your prognostication for the immediate future? You're a futures guy.
Yeah, I mean, I rage against the violence against the light, maybe you might say. The things I think are going to happen, the things I want to happen are very divergent at this point. The things that I've tried to latch on to, just to try to sort of wrap up, end in a positive note. I've been talking about, I was kind of influenced by a lot of different factors over the years, but thinking about how do we resuscitate our civic lives and our collective purpose. And I've thought about, called it the civic trinity. So thinking about our civic mind or brain, we need to know how our systems work. We need to have civics. We need to understand the basics of our institutions. And so there's a missing piece there. Like we've lost it over the years. So that civic mind part, how do things work? And then there's what uh, uh, a kind of scholar activist that we had in a workshop called civic muscle, and I've heard that metaphor come up a lot too. Is that voting every 4 years or doing these things really is kind of, it's not going to build your civic muscle. So are there other places that we can participate in our public lives that actually build, that are rewarded, that have a feedback loop, that we're actually contributing and build our muscles? So not just voting every 4 years, but how do we make our businesses a little bit more democratic? How do we make our churches a little bit more democratic? How do we make our sports team? What are the muscles that we can use to actually collectively make decisions together and feel that and be strengthened by that? Also, we're coming up here, John. And then finally, like our civic heart, which is kind of the soft part, but as important as any of that. How do we have a love for each other and for a better future? And how do we cultivate that? So civic mind, civic muscle, and civic heart. If we have those three things, I think we're at least heading in the right direction for maybe a positive future. And that's where I'm latching my hopes on and latching my energy on to try to build out that part of it and resuscitate our society before we go over the cliff and have to learn the hard way, which is always the worst.
Man, I hate to end it here. We were
Well,
just getting rolling, but
yeah.
thanks so much. Yeah, let's do it again.
Thanks, Jake. That was a lot of good stuff. It's going to take me a while to process all of this.
I didn't know I needed to talk, but I guess I needed to get that out, but it felt good. So thanks for the opportunity and the platform to just splurge into the ether. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right on. Okay, well, thanks so much, and we'll see you soon.